start with a quote. Indeed, perhaps the most significant way that anti-oppressive teaching is queer is its use of discomfort or crisis. Common definitions of good teaching often leave little, if any, room for the moments in education when confronting one's own resistance to disruptive knowledge can be traumatic. In fact, good teaching often means that crisis is averted, that lessons are doable and comfortable, that problems are solved, that learning results in feeling better, that knowledge is a good thing. Yet, if anti-oppressive teaching requires disrupting the repetition of comforting knowledges, then students will always need to confront what they desire not to confront. And since learning what we desire not to learn, as when learning that the very ways in which we think, identify, and act are not only partial but also problematic, can be an upsetting process, crisis should be expected in the process of learning by both the student and the teacher. Like queer activism, queer teaching always works through crisis. The goal is to continue teaching and learning through crisis, to continue experiencing the queer. That quote was taken from Kevin Kumashiro's 2009 book, Against Common Sense, Teaching and Learning Towards Social Justice, published by Routledge. I wanted to make a short podcast to introduce some of the core arguments of my new book, The Queering of the American Child, co-authored with Dr. James Lindsay and published by New Discourses. I'm not sure if this podcast will be out before or after the book releases on February 29th, but either way, I think what follows will either convince you that the book is worth picking up, especially if you're a parent, or it will help lay the runway as you begin to read it. Speaking for myself, I wrote this book because I am convinced that queer theory facilitates the most catastrophic child abuse scandal in modern history. I think the evidence is overwhelming, and after reading thousands upon thousands of pages in the queer theory literature, after investing an embarrassing amount of time researching what our institutions are doing, I had to put everything together in a very digestible weekend read so parents can take a look for themselves and see what their children are going through in schools nationwide. The book makes many arguments, but here are the biggies. Number 1, queer theory exists. I've been reliably told that it doesn't, that it's a right-wing conspiracy theory, that it's the thing conservatives point to so they can justify their sexism, bigotry, and transphobia, etc., etc. Queer theory exists. There's a vast corpus of literature behind it. It's clearly identifiable. And in The Queering of the American Child, we explain what it is, where it comes from, how it got into schools, and what it's trying to accomplish with children. Number 2, queer theory is the doctrine of a religious cult. I refer to that cult as the queer cult, but as we lay out in the book, it could be referred to as the queer Marxist cult, or even more precisely, as Dr. James Lindsay's work so brilliantly lays out, the queer Gnostic cult. Number 3, the queer cult is poisoning the healthy minds and bodies of normal kids. Education is in the grip of this religious cult, and schools are brainwashing children to do 2 things. Number 1, practice queer theory on society. Number 2, practice queer theory on themselves. The outward practice of queer theory on society is meant to subvert and then destroy all norms, all traditions, categories, definitions, standards, rules. And the inward practice of queer theory is one of a radical and perpetual self-revolution, a never-ending deconstruction of oneself in the quest to uncover one's queer divinity. What does this all look like? It looks like kids marching out of schools as activists, with sledgehammers in hand, brainwashed to believe they live in a society of nails. It looks like kids who will never experience normal sexual or cognitive development. Kids who feel like they will never be happy unless they are put under the knife and medicalized for life. Number 4, The queer cult is doing everything it can to subvert parental authority and separate you from your children. The evidence for this is overwhelming, not just in the hellscape that is their academic literature, but in the inclusive policies and practices they deploy in schools nationwide. Public, private, rural, urban, small and large, those strapped with cash and those with overflowing war chests. I'm here to tell you that queer theory must be understood if we're ever to put a stop to the madness and allow children to lead healthy and normal lives. These are the chief arguments in the book. And my co-author and I bring in hundreds of citations so you can hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Straight from the academics, straight from the policy shapers, and straight from the teachers practicing queer theory. Bragging about it. In academic journals, in books, in dissertations, all over the place, everywhere they can. Practicing queer theory on children in schools. Okay, with that out of the way, I want to take a minute to tell you what queer theory is not. And I'll explain this in the context of education because that's the context of the book. Queer theory is not about making sure gay and lesbian kids aren't bullied. I'll repeat, queer theory is not about making sure gay and lesbian kids aren't bullied. It's not about doing everything we can to make sure kids who happen to be gay or lesbian are more visible, less stigmatized, and treated as equally as anyone else. Queer theory is openly, explicitly, rabidly hostile to the idea that some kids just happen to be born gay or lesbian. It's openly hostile to the courageous history of gay and lesbian men and women who demanded equal rights and protections under the law, demanded to be integrated into an American identity and treated just as every other American expects to be treated as a citizen of the United States. The cult of queer theory finds this history intolerable. Queer theory argues that the categories of gay and lesbian should remain radical sites of revolutionary political struggle. And the queer cult hates the fact that gays and lesbians can now lead happy, normal, and stable lives. Gay and lesbian acceptance isn't the goal of queer theory because, according to the literature and activists, and I'll quote here, acceptance doesn't require investigating the construction, production, and maintenance of what is considered normative, nor does it challenge the status quo. The queer cult will forever be positioned against the status quo, no matter what that status quo looks like. For the cult, gays and lesbians are, by definition, conservatives. They are, in the cult's mind, helping to conserve the socio-political order, the constitutional republic. And as such, for the cult, gays and lesbians are, by definition, the enemy. Queer theory is so hostile to the idea of it gets better and the sentiment that who cares about your sexuality, like whatever, tell me something more interesting about yourself, that it is actively convincing children who would grow up and happen to be gay or lesbian that those children were born in the wrong body. A very strong case can be made for the claim that queer theory is a eugenics program that is sterilizing gay and lesbian kids. A eugenics program that is sterilizing kids with autism, kids with various disabilities, kids with trauma, kids with mental health issues. If someone is telling you that queer theory is about helping gay kids, that person is either has no clue what they're talking about, or they're actively manipulating you. They're using gay kids as cover for their queer activism. Okay? Okay. Another point, a very brief point that this book will help you understand fully. Queer theory is not about including everyone in a healthy set of societal norms. It is not about cohesion at all. It is entirely concerned with dissolution. It's perhaps the most corrosive, acidic, and destructive political program to ever escape the academy. If someone is telling you it's about inclusion, they are ill-informed, ignorant, or they are actively trying to manipulate you. Okay, By this point, we can talk about what queer actually means. I turn to queer theorist David Halperin, who provides the definitive definition for the queer cult. And David Halperin says, quote, "Queer identity need not be grounded in any positive truth or in any stable reality." This shouldn't be anywhere near kids. Queer identity is not grounded in any positive truth or any stable reality. Run away, kids. As the very word implies, queer does not name some natural kind or refer to some determinate object. It acquires its meaning from its oppositional relation to the norm. Queer acquires its meaning from its oppositional relation to the norm. It is defined by its position, its oppositional stance towards the norm. Queer is by definition whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. There is nothing in particular to which it necessarily refers. It is an identity without an essence. And again, that's from David Halperin, his 1995 book, Saint Foucault, page 62. Dr. James Lindsay and I use the word queer in our book over 1,000 times. We aren't using it as a stigmatizing term. We aren't using it to refer to a sexuality. We aren't using it because we want to. And after spending as much time as we have in the literature, I can't speak for James, but I would be ecstatic to never see this word again. Ever. We are using it technically, as the cult uses it. Anyone who would suggest we are using it in any other way is ill-informed, ignorant, or actively trying to manipulate you. Okay, queer theory. What is it? Queer theory is the doctrine of a cult. It's a set of religious beliefs centered on the idea that the social, cultural, and political soul of society is possessing each of us. Like evil possession. Like demonic. And convincing us to imprison ourselves in a particular material form. And only through initiation into a special salvific self-knowledge of who we are, which is queer, and how the world works, can we liberate ourselves from ourselves while working to liberate all people from the soul of society. Liberate all people from the evil spirits possessing all of us. What it comes down to is this. Queer theory thinks we're all queer. We just don't know it because we've forgotten it. If we fight off these evil spirits, we'll remember we're queer and we'll be free to materialize our bodies in such a way that our bodies perfectly reflect who we really are on the inside. In layman's terms, the queer cult thinks you only wear what you wear, love who you love, do the hobbies that you do, and behave in this way or that because you have been coerced by a wholly manufactured and unjust evil social expectation to do so. The queer cult believes there is nothing, absolutely nothing, at the core of the human experience. No essence of humanity. When it talks of a soul, it's not talking about a soul as someone like a Christian might conceive of one. It's not talking about a soul as someone being uniquely made in the image of God. It's not talked about as being situated into an evolutionary project billions of years in the making, whereby we are quite literally animals. Advanced ones, yes, or at least we used to be until we started queering everything. But animals nonetheless. Animals that, like all other animals, because of their evolutionary history and nature, exhibit certain behaviors and traits on a distribution that can be studied and more or less understood. The only universal the queer cult thinks links us together is this: that each of us has queer divinity, that each of us has what could be called a gender soul or a gender identity that contains an infinite rainbow of possibility and radical subjectivity that must cast off society's evil spirit so it can be free to materialize on our bodies as it truly is. Really. The queer cult doesn't think humans have access to objective reality. It doesn't think science is real. It doesn't think human nature is real, other than the fact that we are creative and social, just like Karl Marx argued in his philosophic and economic manuscripts of 1844. A lot more about that in the book, by the way. The cult thinks everything in the world is made up, and thus no human being has the right to call what they do normal. Because of this, queer theory can be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of normalcy. Or, if you prefer, abolition of what people agree to call normal. Think of all the things you think are normal. There are two sexes. We can't speak for a specific man or a specific woman, but we can and have very thoroughly identified a distribution of personality traits that unquestionably identifies differences between men and women. These differences are mostly small, but some are big. And again, we can't draw conclusions about a specific individual from the distribution. But you don't need to be told this. You've experienced this your entire life. You know what a man or a woman is, and this isn't difficult. Here's another thing that's normal. Children shouldn't be treated as adults. Or, children can't consent as adults. And children shouldn't be having inappropriate conversations with adults in school. They certainly shouldn't be given porn in schools. That's not normal. They shouldn't be pushed to social transition in schools at all, but especially in the cases where those schools intentionally mislead and lie to parents in order to hide what's going on. That shouldn't be very normal. That's very abnormal. Some could argue that those actions should be criminal. How about children are innocent and shouldn't be initiated into cults? That's normal. So queer theory sees it and its eyes go red, bro. Queer theory sees limitation and barriers and it just can't help itself. The whole point of queer theory is to bust through limitation and barrier. All of them. Every single one. Forever. In the most generous possible light, queer theory sells itself as both a theory of how society works, of how society determines what is and isn't considered normal, and it sells itself as a political program that can be wielded to challenge unfair rules, standards, legitimacy, and norms. In reality, queer theory is a cult doctrine that claims that there is no such thing as being normal, no such thing as legitimacy, no such thing as fair rules or standards, no such thing as a man or a woman, and no such thing as a healthy and innocent child. It's that, and it's a revolutionary political program with an outward and an inward practice. Again, the outward practice is designed to disrupt and dismantle, destroy everything society agrees to call normal. It seeks to destroy all rules, standards, regulations, and legitimacy through perpetual revolution. Nothing can ever be considered normal again. By definition, anything that is considered normal is conservative. If you defend anything normal, any norm, rule, or law, like, for instance, the idea that age of consent laws are a very good thing, or the idea that 11-year-olds shouldn't be put on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones because they can't possibly comprehend what the consequences of such actions are, congratulations, you're a conservative. Bigot. You're on the wrong side of history. The inward practice of queer theory is one of radical and perpetual self-revolution. It's a project of uncovering one's queer divinity and reducing oneself to an identity without an essence, an empty, meaningless shell. This path offers nothing but tremendous turmoil, pain, and suffering. Feel free to believe whatever you want to believe as an adult. Whatever, no one cares. But this all becomes diabolical, evil, and ghastly when applied to education. The point of practicing queer theory in schools is to queer children, to separate children from normalcy and being normal so they can be positioned as battering rams against it. In other words, it's the practice of making children very unhealthy, resentful, deviant, angry, and abnormal. It's a pressure cooker of madness. It's the practice of destabilizing children and thought reforming them, brainwashing them into revolutionaries. It's the process of initiating them into a cult. The cult goes for kids because they're impressionable, they're vulnerable, moldable, ignorant, narcissistic, etc., etc., etc. The cult hijacks a key process in healthy human development, your identity formation. It tries to get kids, and the literature is explicit about this, before they can stabilize into a normal and healthy identity. All kids are queer according to the cult, and the cult will justify anything to make sure kids can't grow up to be normal, healthy, and happy. Lynn Zamer, a queer activist and host of Queer Kid Stuff, which is described here, let me see the description, a YouTube channel directed at children and focused on LGBT issues. She posted on Twitter back in June of 2022, quote, "When I talk about queer, trans, and non-binary kids, I'm not just talking about kids who currently identify as such. I'm talking about all kids, in caps, all kids. Because all kids are queer. Queer is indifferent, non-normative, and pre-structural. That's why kids are vital to liberation movements." My God. This is how the cult thinks. Kids must be initiated before they can stabilize in a healthy and normal identity. Destabilized kids are easy to program into revolutionaries that can be set loose on society to queer things. Parents are the primary stabilizers in their children's lives. They help kids develop normally on a normal developmental track. This is why queer theory hates parents. This is why queer activists try to pass bills like the transgender trafficking bill, which would have literally allowed someone to abduct your child and take them to Maine for gender-affirming care without criminal repercussions. Take your kid to Maine for puberty blockers, followed by cross-sex hormones and even mastectomies and vaginoplasties. If that bill would have passed, the police would literally allow child abductors to walk free without threat of being extradited. My God. You wonder why parental rights are under attack? Read this book. Queer theory doesn't acknowledge parental rights. It thinks your constitutionally protected right to direct the care and upbringing of your child doesn't exist. It can't be clearer. They think your children are their children. Talk about this in the book. There's even a poster for this. A queer activist in Wisconsin put the poster up in one of her classrooms or outside of her classroom, and it says, "If your parents aren't accepting of your new identity, I'm your mom now. Hashtag free mom hugs." You can buy the f***ing shirts on Amazon. Our schools are initiating children into the cult and feel wholly justified in doing so because they think all children are queer. They think parents are imprisoning their children and keeping them from understanding their queer nature. The cult thinks parents are in a cult. The cult of the child. Thanks for that line, Betty Friedan. Those who know, know. They think you're initiating your child into the cult of cis heteronormativity, and they are the enlightened Gnostics who are going to break your child out by initiating your kids into the queer cult because their cult really understands what's best for kids. Okay, enough of that. The queer cult's initiation is facilitated through Paulo Freire's critical pedagogy, which provides the meat, if you didn't know, of culturally relevant teaching and social and emotional learning. We spend a ton of time on this in the book, so I'm not going to say much here other than show a quick example of what critical pedagogy looks like in practice. This is taken from Peterson's 2009 publication, Teaching How to Read the World and Change It, Critical Pedagogy in the Intermediate Grades, which is found in the second edition of the Critical Pedagogy Reader that's published by Routledge. Quote, "Monday morning, a child brings a stray dog into the classroom. The traditional teacher sees that it is removed immediately. The progressive teacher builds on the student's interests, perhaps measures and weighs the animal with the children, has the children draw and write about the dog, and eventually calls the Humane Society. The Freerian teacher does what the progressive teacher does, but more. She asks questions, using the dog as an object of reflection. Why are there so many stray dogs in our neighborhood? Why are there more here than in the rich suburbs? Why do people have dogs? Why doesn't the city allocate enough money to clean up after the dogs and care for the strays? While accepting stray animals into the classroom isn't the bellwether mark for an elementary Freerian teacher, engaging children in reflective dialogue on topics of their interest is. Critical pedagogy takes things a child might be interested in, something a child finds engaging, exciting, controversial, something that will draw out emotion, a generative theme to be technical, and it uses that as a mediator for a political lesson, a mediator to brainwash children. I'm going to riff on this dog example to demonstrate how easy this is to pull off. Monday morning, a child says, "Hey teacher, I'm playing with boys' toys." The traditional teacher tells the little girl, "Put the toy down and practice writing the alphabet." That's what we do in school. The progressive teacher builds on the student's interest. "What do you like about that toy? Do you have toys like this at home? I'll stop teaching you to write. That's rooted in white supremacy. We can all play together for an hour instead." The Freerian teacher does what the progressive teacher does, but more. She asks questions, using the toy as an object of reflection. Why did you call this a boy's toy? Who decides which toys are for boys and which toys are for girls? What is a boy? How do you know you're a girl? Did your parents ever ask you how you feel on the inside? While accepting toys into the classroom isn't the bellwether mark of an elementary Freerian teacher, engaging children in reflective dialogue on the topic of their interest is. Parents are rightly identifying much of the material the queer cult is using to brainwash children. The genderbread man, the gender bear, the gender unicorn, pornographic books, materials provided by WPATH, Gleason, SECUS, GSA, the UN, and especially its education arm, UNESCO, etc., but much of what's happening in schools isn't tracked. It happens through conversations between teachers and students modeled explicitly on Paulo Freire's dialogical approach, his critical approach to education. Today, that model is most often called culturally relevant teaching or social and emotional learning. Gloria Ladson-Billings, the person who popularized culturally relevant teaching in the 1990s, says her model is meant to develop critical consciousness in learners. She says so explicitly. The first time I read it was in her 1995 publication, Towards a Culturally Relevant Pedagogy, and she continues saying so to this day. CASEL, the organization that sets the tone, strategy, and benchmarks for all of our nation's SEL programs, nearly, also names critical consciousness explicitly. The teachers pumped out of education schools today are trained to practice critical pedagogy. The teaching method and practice is pioneered by Paulo Freire and picked up by his many disciples over the years, given flowery new names, and unassuming districts and parents will pick them up. The brainwashing happens mostly through these conversations, where something as straightforward as a statistics problem can be transformed into a conversation about transgenocide. No, I'm not kidding. We've got an example in the book. These conversations can mostly only be uncovered through an ironclad relationship with your child. You will only know if these conversations are happening if you talk to your child about what they are talking about in school. I mean, like really talk to them. Seriously. Just last year, a teachers union in Colorado told teachers, if you do a questionnaire, please make it a paper and pencil activity. Any digital records are more permanent and may be requested under federal law. My God. As parents, we must know how all of this works, and this book will help you understand that. If you haven't been paying attention to what's happening in schools, you must know this. The schools are using traditional lessons, basic reading lessons, math lessons, social studies lessons, etc., to mediate political brainwashing, using them to introduce and initiate your children into a religious cult. The schools are lying to you. they are hiding information from you. They think you are the enemy. That's why the FBI is tracking moms at school board meetings. That's why the teachers' unions are saying, and I've got a quote here, educators love their students and know better than anyone what they need to learn and thrive. Better than anyone, really, anyone. That's a tweet from the NEA, not just the largest teachers' union in the country, the largest labor union in the country. 3 million members with a big old middle finger to you and your parental rights. Your constitutional rights. Washington v. Glucksberg. Washington v. Glucksberg. It protects the fundamental right of parents to direct the care, upbringing, and education of their children. Queer theory doesn't account for everything wrong in education today, not even close. But it does account for the most disastrous and evil policies and practices. It is a massive child abuse scandal. For those of you that are planning on picking up a copy of the book, I hope this has you fired up to learn more. For everyone else, I'd encourage you to pick up a copy. We can end the queering of the American child. And for my Canadian friends, although this book is situated in the context of U.S. education, it can be easily understood and situated into the context of Canadian education, which I think is in many ways even more captured by this cult. We can only beat queer theory if we understand what it is and what it's attempting to accomplish with our children. This book will help you do that. And I think once the word is out, it's game over. Game over. They came for the kids. Big mistake.